Happy
What?
Friday. I'm so excited to be back. Can we just pause for a second? I was having a little bit of palpitation as we were watching Peter join us. He had to rush to find his location.
It's
It's
been one
like
of those
Peter
days,
came
Shelley.
in. Peter came in there last second, which is
Last
no
second.
Skin of
worries.
my
He's
teeth.
here.
Oh
He's
man, I
here.
love it.
Welcome,
I love it.
Peter. How are you guys doing?
I'm actually doing really well. I'm really excited about this week's topic. This is another counseling session for Shelly. But
That's
but
great.
I think this is going to be a good conversation. I know a lot of us are kind of dealing with this in different ways of variety in our jobs. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys about groupthink and how we overcome it.
That's great. I guess why don't we take a second just to introduce ourselves in case
Yeah.
there's anyone new out there. Hopefully there are one or two new people who might be watching us. Um, what? Hello, Shelly. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm usually the person who has a terrible intro. So
Yeah,
hi everybody. I'm Shelly Jeffcoat. Hello, Makisha. How are you? All right, I do have to give a quick shout out to everybody who's watching on other channels. I have multiple streams going on. So hi from Facebook.
wonderful.
I'm hi on YouTube and LinkedIn, and you can really find out more about me on LinkedIn. But essentially, I'm a brand expert, and I have a company that owns a brand that we kind of serve teen and veteran um, offerings on branding and things of that nature. I'm also a podcaster and kind of all around, but more importantly, I'm a member of this amazing group, and I'm just excited to have this conversation again this week.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Hello.
Hi, Jen. Stop. Oh, the posse's coming in. So this is from YouTube. Okay. Also, please don't forget to like and share on all of our channels. And if you're commenting on in our groups on LinkedIn as well, we will come back and check the comments. So that was something I want to make sure. But y'all, we are listening, and drop your comments and your questions so that we can have this a good session.
That is awesome. I just noticed for the first time. Now I do another LinkedIn live on
Yeah.
Friday mornings, and just now I noticed the F there, which tells you
Facebook.
where they're coming in from, which I had not noticed here
Yeah.
on
Yep.
Jan right here,
Facebook, YouTube,
YouTube.
and LinkedIn.
It's the first time I'm noticing that.
Yeah.
Shelley, that's a level of technical expertise that is beyond me at this
My
point.
people
So
need me.
I tell you,
That's awesome.
yeah.
That's great. We love it. We love it. Peter, tell us, who are
Hey,
you?
I am Peter Laughter, and I left a 25-year entrepreneurial career in the recruiting and staffing industry because recruiting is screwed, and I believe that we are all of us woven together by the threads of our stories, and I help companies tell their stories to people who matter most, and so they can fix what is broken about recruiting.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Peter. And I am Linwood Ross. I am the founder and CEO of Accelerate. We focus on helping people to thrive, right, in the digital
Yes.
age, helping people to get work done faster, and give organizations a roadmap, a framework to make their people um, a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Sort of. It's Friday
Your second
afternoon.
LinkedIn Live, Lenwood. You
I
got
am
Wow.
tired. Let me tell you, it has been a week. So today we're talking
Yeah.
about groupthink,
Yes.
and Shelly and I were just kind of talking as we were getting started here. I have a quick
Mhm.
question for you, Shelly.
Yes.
I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
I'm okay with the spotlight.
If you don't want to answer, you don't have to.
You've got my attention. That's for
But
sure.
No, I'm
here's the question. Actually, today I'm going to pull it up so I can
Okay.
cite it correctly.
okay.
But today I posted on my LinkedIn page a poll. Peter, did
Okay.
you see I think Peter is
I did. I
commented on the poll,
responded and I
right?
commented.
You
Yeah.
did. Oh,
So So
Here's kind of cheating because I'm the only person in my organization right now, but I asked for my previous organization.
That's okay. No, that's all right. Here's the question.
Okay.
The question was, how do you describe your organization's leadership practices? Now, the background to that is, and before you know, because I know we might have leadership watching or whatever, so you may, but in February, the McKinsey Global Institute put out this research report, which I have handy because I'm spending lots of time analyzing what they had to say. And basically in this research report, they said that management's practices, systems, and culture often determine the company's performance, right? That makes perfect sense. So they analyzed tens of thousands of organizations around the world in every industry to see if there were any patterns for management practices. And what they found out is that the highest performing organizations had leadership practices that focused on operating collaboratively.
Yes.
Okay. So the two in these collaborative environments, these companies both focused on human capital development as well as financial performance. And these organizations outperformed other organizations in revenue, profit margin, return on capital, and shareholder return. So any measure that the CEO would be primarily concerned about, these collaborative companies that focused on human capital development and financial performance, they outperformed. There were three other categories. The other category they called people-focused companies. People-focused companies have encouraging, I'll call it operating systems, encouraging operating systems. Then the other type of company, another type of company is a top-down operating system. Okay. But the majority of companies, 55% of companies, have no discernible operating system, no discernible management practices. Okay. So that was the vast majority of companies, and those companies perform the worst. Right. So I created this poll today asking, what would you say the management practices are of your organizations? And so far we've had 25 people vote. 44% say there are no clear patterns. 32% say it's top down. Collaborative companies are coming in at 16%, and encouraging companies are coming in at 8% so far.
It's actually a mix. It's actually a mix. The experience that I'm having right now, I think the first thing is that one of the opportunities and what's working well where I am, y'all can look me up on LinkedIn, is that when we talk about leadership practices and leadership principles, it's aligned back to our values and our purpose. So it's clearly stated, it is communicated, and we recognize and reward the behavior regardless of what level you are in the organization, manager, C-suite, etc.
Very important.
So that's the first thing. So we tie it back to the culture. The second thing, though, is there are some decisions that have to, don't be upset with me, y'all, but there are some decisions that actually do have to be top down, because you're going to expect that there's information that maybe the broader population, they wouldn't have access to. And so there's a level of trust. So there's a level of trust within the leadership team that they're listening. So we have really intentional listening strategy back into the employee population, so we understand what the employees' needs are, and then we also have a sense of trust that they do trust that we're making the right decisions across the organization, and we align it back to our priorities, and we actually communicate, this is what we're doing. So these are the priorities, and and this is how we're going to operationalize and go, kind of solve the bigger problems, etc. And when it comes to collaboration, though, and the reason I was saying this is mixed, this is not a cheat, but this is literally where I was starting out this week, because I was participating in a meeting where I was experiencing groupthink. And I was experiencing it also as someone who did not say anything, which annoys me now that I'm thinking about it. But I got pulled into this thing. And so as you're talking about leadership principles, this is something like, this is a behavior that I don't know that any leader wants to admit to, okay? But it really does happen. And so for those of you all who don't know what groupthink is, just to really quickly define it, I was actually pulling up a different article earlier this week because I wanted to make sure I had this right. But basically, it's almost like when you're going along to get along, at the end of a really tough decision-making process. Have you been in that position where you're working on something and it's been a really rough decision-making process, and you understand that you can't really accept a wide variety of perspectives, right? So there's input, but you can't accept a wide variety of perspectives because you do have to make a decision. And so sometimes it's really difficult for individual members to object. This is what happened to me because of the way that it was being positioned, the way that it would impact the organization, the way that the information was being fed back was, well, I guess we don't have a choice. So I just went along to get along because I didn't want to be the person. And I'm just saying this does happen. So I didn't want to be the person who was gonna, interrupt,
rock the boat,
or rock the boat. And I thought, maybe we can fix these tactical type things further down the road. Let's deal with, making the strategy, like lay out the strategy right now. So that was groupthink. When I stepped away from it, it felt horrible because it just felt like, I had the seat at the table. I didn't use my voice, and I just allowed this to happen. And I wondered, when we say collaboration, do we understand what collaboration means? And then Peter, I was like, Linwood, what role would strategic doing, had I been more informed on strategic doing, would that have been a situation or an experience where I could bring some of that learning into that conversation, so it didn't land and feel like, oh, great, another groupthink session.
Yeah.
So that's where I was.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I'm in the middle of the book, so I will let you know when I come. I'm sure Lenwood has an answer. But I think what you're hitting on, and this is one of the things that I started creating in my past companies, is structures for dissent. And I think that is a really, really, I was super lucky as a leader in that I had an experience. And I just want to touch base that groupthink. It is a horrible feeling. And as you're saying it, I was on the board of a non-for-profit. We were looking for a new executive director. It was a rough search. It was a very, very large search committee. We got down to the final choice, and I knew in my heart of hearts that it was the wrong choice. Now, we had spent probably, 20 hours a week working on this as individuals for months. I mean, it was a lot of work, and I was convinced that this person wasn't right. Newsflash, he wasn't. And there was a member of the committee who burst into tears at the thought of having to redo the search again. And I related. I did not want to have to go through that again. But as I look back, I know I will never make that mistake again. Like, I learned my lesson. Yeah. And that was one of the worst moments of my career, was falling through that. And what I think, but one of the things it taught me was it's really important to arm employees with the ability and the structure that they need to follow to say, hey, boss, you got your head up your butt. And you're not seeing reality.
You're not seeing the whole thing.
And a practice within the organization of leaders holding up those moments and celebrating them. right? Those two
Wow.
things need to happen. Employees need a structure, so they know, they can follow a step-by-step process to know, like, this is not the right call, and I am
Yeah,
empowered to say something about it. And 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 for those moments to be held up and those people to be celebrated for that incredible act of courage. And it is telling the boss he's got his head
it
up his
is.
ass, excuse my French, is incredibly hard. Yeah, and I don't think leaders we like, particularly nowadays. I'm a good guy. People can
Yeah.
talk to me. I'm easygoing. No, they can't.
No, you can't.
Yeah,
No, you can't.
that's a great point. I mean, I especially when I was a young executive, I did not have awareness of how other people perceived me in the organization and the power differential, whether it was on my team or even in other teams. Because while I wasn't, at the senior most level of the organization, in my role, I was almost always speaking to C-level executives, or I was dealing with the board of directors, or, and I just, when you're dealing at that, I just had, I'm
Yeah.
first of all struggling or in general with, managing my work, but I didn't have a understanding that when people would see, me having, one-on-one meetings with the CEO, or seeing the CFO and the president of the company coming to my office to meet with me, that creates an impression that,
Mhm.
I'm a person with power and influence, which is actually wasn't the case at all.
Which means we can't challenge anything that you bring to the
Yeah.
table because I don't want to upset Lenwood because of his connection.
Yeah.
And that's part of what happened to me this week was great. I don't want to challenge this person because I know, that person's connected and I don't really feel like going down that rabbit hole because, so, okay, everyone's just going to
Yeah.
go along with it. But in my gut, it was, no, I don't, this is not collaboration.
Yeah. Well, now let's go back to that original. Well, maybe you don't want to say, but depending on the type of management practices and culture that the organization has, people will feel more or less able to speak up, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
in a more top-down culture, people might feel less
Less safe.
that differing views are less accepted,
Yeah.
because management is not creating an environment where they're saying, hey, dissenting voices welcome.
Right. It's
That's
more
about
follow the task.
yeah, it's like
Do what I said. Don't ask me
yeah.
why. That,
So yeah.
and that doesn't serve well, right? Because what's the point in hiring these talented individuals if you're not going to listen to their feedback and their input so that you can improve whatever it is, the product, the service, etc. And so that's why I mentioned culture when we talked about leadership practices. Now, as we say that, within any organization, there could be multiple cultures at play. So what might happen within a corporate function might not happen within a different business unit, division, etc. So I think this is
You're talking about
that's
like team
where
culture versus
team culture.
team culture
Yeah,
might be very different from the
exactly.
organizational culture.
Exactly. So maybe within your team, there is I welcome dissenting viewpoints, but that manager cannot dissent as he or she goes even further up the ladder.
Right.
So those are some of the real world complications around some of these issues.
And I think Lenwood's point is really, really important, that leaders need to be conscious of how they are perceived. And I
Yes.
remember, so I sold a company, and then I was carving out a small client group to create another one. And the guy I sold it to bought the lease of that I had. It was much bigger space than I needed, and was using it as an incubator. And then I negotiated a year of free rent in that space as I was getting my new thing started. And then he ended up investing in that company. And one day, one of the guys with another one of his companies' daughter went to a school nearby, junior high school, and they had a international fair, and he was Greek, and his daughter had all this good Greek food. So he invited us over on a Friday afternoon, and everyone in the office, was about 8 of us, tropped over to this middle school and ate some spanakopita. It was great. And I went back to the office with my partner, and there was my investor, in the office, and he came in and nobody was there. I was assuming he'd be a little pissed off because wondering where everyone was. And I walk in, and the first thing he said was, "Peter, come in the conference room. I want to talk to you about something." And I swear to God, I thought I was going to get fired. Yeah, and I had never had that experience before. And here I am. I'm sitting there. I'm doing my breathing exercises, trying to calm down. I'm barely able to listen to the man. Yeah, and now here's the thing. How many times had I done the same thing? Hey, come on here. I want to chat with you about something. Yeah, but I had no idea that the majority of the people I was doing that with, were having the same effect. But I just, yeah, we're just having a chat, no big deal, But it really opened my eyes, like, oh. And I have never since then ever asked someone to come into a conversation without them knowing the agenda and my reason why. Like, hey, I want to talk about X. Yeah, I'm really excited about this, or I want to figure out how we're going to figure this out. Yeah, can we chat? Yeah, but it
That's
was
the perception.
It was. I mean, and this was. I really, at that point, I had done a lot of work on myself. I had come from being a very, very bad boss to being a moderately okay boss, but it had come with a lot of work. So, yeah, and I realized, like, I got blind spots everywhere, and the desire, and I think what you said, culture, it has to be in service of a purpose. And a lot of companies create mission statements and they call them a purpose, really something anchored in why we are doing this. And I think that's the first step in really opening up those conversations, is for people to be able to recognize and say, hey, this is behavior that is not. Yeah.
I love that example because, Peter, I was sitting here thinking, and if I was one of your employees, knowing the proximity, visually seeing the proximity that you have with the investor, if you bring a project to the table, probably going to have to go along with it because Peter is connected in that way, right? I mean, and that's real life. Like, this happens all the time.
Absolutely.
And all the time.
Well, what was a painful lesson for me, Shelley, is the founder of the company was not the power source; it was the COO. Yeah, and that was a painful lesson too, because as an entrepreneur, I just didn't really understand politics. So, yeah, it was an interesting education for me, that couple of year stretch.
Yeah, no, the politics of organizations is really interesting. Actually, next week, we are going to have a guest. We haven't had a guest in a while, but next week we are going to have a guest. I usually prepare something for it. I'm sorry, folks. We're going to have a guest, and she is an expert in office politics.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So she'll be talking about that. So what I wanted to touch base on, because you brought it up, I like to put things into context, because a lot of times we talk about, purpose and values, or we talk about collaboration, we talk about, these organizational practices and all this stuff. And, why does any of that matter? What's go ahead.
Well, the study you pointed at the top of the show, I think, is right there. Like, that's why it matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, higher retention, more profit. I mean, it's just
that's why I mentioned it. It's because we're going through this transition. We're moving from one type of economy, and it's been going on for a long time. Okay. Yeah. It's not like when the global economy transforms, it only takes like a year. The whole, the global economy is transforming in the same way that the economy transformed from being an agrarian economy to being an industrial economy, right? That was something that happened from started probably around 1850 in the UK and went all the way through, the transition probably to the 1920s. you know, and even beyond that, maybe even 1940. That transition, probably a 90-year period. I'm sure somebody will say, actually, no, Linwood, it was this time. But my point is, that's a long time where people are moving from, you know, a feudal system basically in Europe, where, you know, you have somebody who is basically running, you know, some large land tract, and they've got tenants and they farm that. You had transatlantic slave trade, right? That was all part of that agrarian economy that was fueling the world. And then things changed, and we had an industrial economy, which was all about factories and mechanization and the assembly line, Henry Ford's assembly line. Those were all aspects. So now we're in a transition from that industrial economy to a digital economy. And that's been going on for quite some time. You know, the internet was, you know, kind of the first major leap. Then we had cloud computing. You couldn't have cloud computing without the internet.
Right.
Right. Then you have
it would be challenging. That's
it would be very
challenging. You're running around with a lot of floppy disks. Yeah.
And then you add mobility on top of cloud computing, and I call mobility, the cloud, mobility, and social media, which is built on top of both of the. So social media really took off when the cloud and mobility came together, right?
Yeah.
And so I used to call those the 3 pillars of digital transformation. Now we have 4. There's a 4th pillar, and that's artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the things, is I think particularly from our management styles, we are still very much in a industrial mindset.
I agree.
And
you know,
I agree.
I gave a presentation, I think it was either last week or week before last, to some organizational design professionals. And the presentation was about this transition that I'm talking about. And what I said to them is, management focused first primarily on the technology, the technologies that we need to be digital organizations. They have not focused on the people and the management practices that are no longer suitable to the way we operate.
Say that again, Leonard. I want to hear that one more time.
Starting from where?
Well, that they're no longer suited. The management practices are no longer suitable.
The management practices are no longer suitable to, I said, the way we operate, but really it's the way the economy, the economy. So we're in a networked economy, and because we're in a networked economy, power shifts from the top out to the middle. And things move much, much faster.
And I think that's a really critical understanding, is power has always been fluid and dynamic, right? Yeah, you're the CEO and you think you're in charge. Wait until your number one person gives notice. Who has the power in that moment, right? Yeah. So, I mean, you know, it's always been that, but particularly too, which fundamentally changes the role of leadership. And I think with one of the people who commented on your post, which I thought was particularly brilliant, another one of your Ed friends, at the end of the day, Ed Hansen, who's brilliant. I met with him this week. At the end of the day, people are the opportunity to be solved for. I wrote it down. I thought it was the most brilliant thing, because, and we think it's technology. We think, it's supply chain. We think it's strategy, but we're coming from a very, very, very narrow viewpoint and understanding. And when we can widen our viewpoint through the position of our teams and have them inform us, then we can see clearly. But we can't do that if we think we're in charge, and we're not, right? Yeah, I mean, I think that number that you pointed is that companies that really have a collaborative and focused approach are 2.5 times more productive. I
Yeah,
mean, that's
it's a lot.
Yeah,
Like I
it's a
do
lot.
have a chart somewhere. I mean, I didn't prepare to get into it where I kind of bar graphed it. They're way more profitable.
it,
And there are very good reasons for that. One is they're moving much faster.
Right. They're solving
They're
problems. So there's
solving
a couple of
problems faster,
they're
Shelley.
solving problem faster. There's a couple of people in the chat. So hi, hey Laura,
Hi.
thank you for joining us. So Laura is with an incredible organization. If she's still here, I'll let her drop it in the chat. And she actually works within the recruiting space and with again some really Blue Star families, large organizations. And then Jan Stubbs is an actual engineer. Just awesome person as well. And I was thinking about when you were hitting on, and the Dump and Ground podcast, shout out to all the companies that are watching it through the podcast that way. But I was thinking about when I was trying to take it back to groupthink and the idea that it's not even that it just stifles innovation, which is what I think Peter was starting to shift into. He talked about creating blind spots as a leader. It just encourages you to be at the status quo and not shift or move. It just kind of suffocates growth. Something I was thinking about around the D&I space, because we have a lot of surveys, and DEI we know is great for business and our communities, the society overall. But there's a lot of talk around psychological safety, and I wanted to pull it into the conversation about teams that or employees who feel like they're in a workplace environment where they actually can. So if I'm an engineer, I need to be able to tell you if there's a major design flaw in our product before we try to release it.
Yeah, that's step one.
That's step one. But this is like this is like the basic, kind of basic response. How do you manage that when you're trying to solve more complex problems where it's not so tactical, right? How do you solve that as so the point that Peter made, being in a room where you're considering the new hire who is going to make an impact on the organization. So now I'm throwing it into like the recruiting space. Do you, from even a recruiting perspective, are you ever in that position where that maybe the target audience is wrong, or maybe the candidate profile is wrong, and you have a situation where that becomes groupthink because the hiring manager is dictating what he or she wants, and yet that is not, the talent pool isn't serving that up. So there's so many variations of where this thinking comes into play. I'm thinking you'd want to have a collaborative conversation if you're in TA, right? Because you need to have both data and candidates, and then you're kind of working through the sources that way.
So a good friend of mine 6 months ago called me and said, "Hey, we're having trouble with this role, and this is the profile that the CEO wants for it." And I looked at it, I was like, "Yep, those people are never going to take this job. It's the wrong role, right?" Yeah, and so now we had a conversation 3 weeks ago about the same role. Still not working. Yeah, and the CEO of the company has not been able to listen to the picture he has of his mind of who should be in this role is the wrong picture. Yeah, and what he is doing is blaming everybody else.
Of course.
For it's just but I remember seeing it right in the beginning. And my friend is so beaten down. She's like, whatever. Yeah.
She's disengaged.
Yeah.
She's
Disengaged.
disengaged. It's the
Yeah.
the hierarchical top
Yes.
down. It causes people to disengage. There's lots of reasons for it, but one of the main reasons is that we have gotten used to a more participatory way of being.
Yeah.
We're used to participating more. You know what I'm saying? Like before social media, like when were you ever engaged in so many conversations, so many different people, so actively all the time? It's a different way. And those types of things impact our expectations for how we're going to operate in all kinds of situations. It's like when people used to talk about Amazon and how, Amazon, I won't call it the early days of e-commerce, but they were really pushing the boundaries with Prime and 2-day delivery. And one of the things that was really difficult to get organizations that were in industries that were not necessarily connected to Amazon, connected to the industries that Amazon, originally was just books, folks. Then they branched out into other areas. But where I'm going with this is Amazon getting things to people in 2 days made people expect that Petco could get stuff to them in 2 days. Right? Because you're having an experience in one place, you begin to expect that experience in another place. And that is happening, 10x all around. The more connected we become, the more those kinds of things begin to affect how we view all kinds of issues.
So how do you overcome groupthink? What are some of the recommendations?
So, and this is also, I think this is going to sound like I'm going off on a left field, but I think we have very few models of leaders who are the opposite of hierarchical, right? Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it. And like NASA, when they first started, hired artists to paint pictures of people living in space and other planets so that the American population could imagine it. And I think that's, this art, I think, plays a huge factor in our ability to understand ourselves and visualize a future.
That's right.
And so when I look at our art, I mean, it is Succession and all of these things, which are very, very hierarchical, and that's what a leader looks like. Now I'm beginning to see that melting a little bit. I don't know if anybody watches Ted Lasso, but I think, from a leadership perspective, I think it's probably the most brilliant piece of mass media art I have ever seen. And as a hands-off approach that leaders take, and the power of letting other people make decisions, which is it's fascinating to watch.
Guiding. Ted Lasso guides. He knows what the outcome, but it doesn't. If Ted says do it this way, it's not as impactful as him guiding someone through a journey of discovering the answer. And that is what leaders who are going to succeed in the future need to get used to doing. It is a guiding way of being, where instead of telling your team what to do, you're encouraging your team to experiment, to find a solution, and you'll know what works based on the data and feedback that you're getting.
But I also think even the guiding is a misconception, because it includes the idea that the CEO really knows all along what the best person is.
I was just about to say, there are so many managers who have zero clue.
But that's okay. That's totally okay.
The guiding, that's a great point, Peter. The guiding is not, I know the answer. The guiding is in, this is how we relate to one another. This is how we operate in order to get to that place. So the CEO comes in where you've established a psychologically safe environment, or it doesn't even have to be the CEO. It could be, a different leader, but they come in and they say, wait a minute, you violated our rule on psychological safety one more time and you're out. Okay. We got to enforce the boundaries. So it's that type of, the guidance is actually in social skills and the
Social
skills
skills,
that
yeah.
we need to work together in order to find solutions.
I want to point out Katrina Jones' comment because it's
Yeah.
yeah,
Discovery is everything.
and well, answer discovery is everything, and I think that's. But I also
Yeah.
think it's the. I remember the sense of pressure and imposter syndrome I felt when I had the mistaken belief that I was supposed to have all the answers, and I rarely did. And it was and the freedom of
Yeah.
walking into a room with a massive problem and having
Yeah.
no clue how to solve it, but the
Yeah.
unrelenting faith that the answer was somewhere in the room. My job was
Exactly.
to help people uncover it. Period. And it was a joy to solve problems
Yeah.
at
It's
that point.
liberating.
Yeah. I love that. I love the way that you put that. It's a joy to solve problems, and I think it's part of the attitude and the way that we take the approach. So when I was thinking about, so how do you solve this, or how do you overcome it? I don't even know that if it's something to overcome on a broad, like, these are the 3 things employees need to do. For me personally, because that's how I operate, I'm thinking about, my response, and the way that I would approach the situation in another way. And I love the way that you laid that out, Peter. It's not about like, I don't want to get caught up in groupthink, and that I don't want to be the unpopular opinion. There are certain things bits of information that I have that will be able to solve the broader problem. But man, I'm excited about the challenge that's ahead and the way that we approach it, versus,
That's how I used to do
great.
it. Working
Great.
together to get the job done. That was
Yeah.
that's what I used to do that in the office.
Yeah.
Working together to get the job
Yeah.
done. I want
It's
to
that.
bring back, Shelley, kind of to what you were talking
Yeah.
about. Something that was in this McKinsey research report, which I found just fascinating. And then we got a great comment that has just come in.
Comment, yeah.
Those collaborative environments, each
Yeah.
collaborative environment is unique.
Yes.
Okay, but that's interesting. Okay, so it's not like there's some uniform
That's
way
right.
of doing it. It's that these
right.
organizations have come up with management practices and different things
That's right.
that they use to be collaborative. Now, that's good for the organization. However, as our problems become more complex, and we need to work outside our organizations, we need to work between organizations, or we have more than one organization is needed to solve a problem. We need to have a common language, a common way of working together. That's what strategic doing is.
Yeah.
Strategic doing is a discipline that anyone can learn and follow to work collaboratively. And there's nothing else like it out there. The Strategic Doing Institute is, I think the world leader in collaborative science. And, Ed Morrison, he was our first guest on our second show.
Yeah.
He talked about this need for us.
Yeah.
And I mean that in the broadest possible sense. What are 10 billion people on the planet? Yeah. The need for us to work together to solve problems, because we have, I'm going to go off on a tangent, but it's an important tangent, an existential crisis happening all around us with climate change. It is a huge challenge. We are going to need to work together to rapidly transform the global economy away from fossil fuels. And we're going to need to work together, building ecosystems to adapt to our new environment. Folks, the world is changing. We're right now experiencing stuff that happened 30 years ago. The stuff that was going on 30 years ago is responsible for what we're experiencing today.
Give me an example. What do you mean, so I understand?
Car emissions.
Oh yeah, I got it. Yep.
Yeah.
Car emissions. So the climate, what we're doing today, it's adding, but the globe is still warming.
Yeah.
We're still going.
So
and we're
that
gonna have to adapt. Human ecosystems are gonna have to adapt.
And I think with that, is we will fundamentally have to shift our model of conflict. And I think that is there's she's all over LinkedIn. She's an illustrator, Liz Fosseline. And if you don't know her, follow her immediately. But she has this ability to make these little comics and illustrations that make complete sense of very, very complex things. But she made a comic that changed my life about a year ago, and it was unhealthy conflict versus healthy conflict. And she had two people with a cloud in between them, say unhealthy conflict, you versus me, and then healthy conflict, you and me versus the problem. And I think
Oh,
that
wow.
is what I saw that. And now I have a TEDx talk on conflict. I think about conflict a lot, and the healthy aspects of conflict, but I had never seen anything like that. And what I've realized is that we have been stuck in this model of conflict where conflict emerges, it's you versus me, rather than taking a step back and figuring out what is the problem and how do we get at this problem. And the thing that I'll give you a preview of my next, because my next TEDx talk is going to be on this, is the imperative of that. Yeah, and if we think about it, if racism was a tool created by the oppressor class to keep poor white peasants from joining together with enslaved people, then should we not, at this point, with global warming and the immense problems that we have, view all problems that are poised as you versus me as tools of the oppressor and refuse to engage in them? Yeah.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. I will add this thought, okay, which comes from Ed. I'm just communicating it. One of the things that Ed learned in his many years of creating strategic doing is that when you focus on the problem, what ends up happening is people begin to point at each other about, what is the real problem, how, all this different stuff. And he said, with complex issues, there is no root cause problem. There are many things that are contributing to it. He says the better approach, and the approach that is in this book, Strategic Doing, and the training that we offer on strategic doing, is to frame the right question. So it's not about the problem. It's about how can we frame this solution in a way that we can come together and agree on it. The appreciative question. What do we want to accomplish?
That's it.
What do we want to accomplish,
What do we want to accomplish
that solves our problem? And it's like a what if statement. What if we X, Y, and Z?
And then you work your way through.
Then now you're working together, to come up with a question. What if we did this? And then once we frame that question, now we can start to move towards finding assets to link and leverage to help us to get to that desirable future place.
I'm reading that chapter now and loving it.
I love that, Len. So Jan's point about getting people to act is a bigger issue, especially when with multiple groups involved. And this is one of those, like, if you're not, we talked about priorities before, and if you're not aware, even as a group, what the actual priority is, or quite frankly, are we solving this problem together, or am I going to hot potato it and say it's your issue and then come back with a resolution, and then maybe the group will accept it or not. So I love that the way that is framed out.
Not that I want this whole conversation to be about strategic doing, but strategic doing is an operating system that an organization can adopt to radically transform how they're working. And what it does is it starts with a psychological safe environment. So that's the starting point. Okay.
Yeah.
Then when we're working as a team, it's letting everyone know that they must contribute something to what we're doing. So it's not like one person is doing all, what happens sometimes and you say, well, who's going to do that? And no. In the framework of strategic doing, everyone takes on something to do and what that does is leadership and action become shared. You're much more willing to act when you know that your contribution is valued.
Yes, absolutely.
When you go to the meeting and every time you offer something, someone shuts you down.
Yeah.
Eventually you stop offering.
Yeah.
That's right.
Or
that's absolutely true.
If the boss comes in and says, this is what we're going to do, why
then that's what you're going to do.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
I used to do that all the time.
Yeah. Okay, that's what we're doing.
Hey, this is what we're going to do, blah, blah, blah. I had the plan. But what has liberated me, and part of it is learning strategic doing, is it's so much easier when we all work together.
Yeah.
And I think one of the benefits, not to continue to shill for strategic doing, but one of the benefits of strategic doing is it's project based, right? And I think it is, because I think getting back to my leadership example is we don't know. Most leaders don't actually know the benefits, and there's no talking that will convince you. Like you have to experience it. Like for me, it was this visceral thing of having a massive problem that was keeping me up at night, and having a stupid idea for how to solve it, and having one of my employees get in my face and say no. That's not, and then watching that like, oh, that was really brilliant.
You know what Ed said to me that was really I've spent a lot of time with Ed Morrison. It's been like a mind meld. So I've come up quite a bit and in terms of my thinking. But what he said to me was, nobody alive today has lived in a post-pandemic period with artificial intelligence widely available for our competitors to use. So the idea that the business people have any clue what to do is a complete farce.
Yeah.
That nobody alive has ever lived in this environment before. So what we need to do is we need to start rapidly experimenting to see what works. Yeah. I discovered yesterday, to my amazement, that Grammarly has been training on my writing for 3 years. They unlocked. I'm not shilling for Grammarly. I don't get it. But I'm saying
this is not a sponsored post.
Yesterday, Grammarly, or yesterday, I noticed that Grammarly had unlocked an AI tool like ChatGPT, except it's been trained on my writing.
Oh.
So it has prompts in there where it will say, would you like, thank you note. You want it to be more inspirational? You want it to be more casual, more formal? And it's using my writing.
Wow.
To change. Unbelievably powerful. And I said, yes, I said, I could kiss those guys at Grammarly.
Oh yeah, because
yeah.
I'm like, we're gonna look this up afterwards.
I'm getting ready to pucker. Yeah.
They did it, and I didn't even know they were doing it.
Wow.
It was genius because I don't have great grammar, so I'm like, okay, in my writing, I said I'm gonna pay for this premium service because it's really helpful to get a suggestion on how to better write the sentence. And so, for years now, I haven't put anything out that Grammarly didn't go over. Fix my grammar. Yeah. Then yesterday I see this additional little bubble, and I click on it, and I'm like, whoop! What is this?
They've just run.
Well, and that's a representation of like I think that non-collaborative leaders are going to die. And I think that that is a
Yeah,
perfect
yeah.
example. And so
A good
last
group.
week, our session was on artificial intelligence. And
Yes.
I was at a conference, I had a speaker, it was a little bit boring. So I was like, let me get out of here. And I saw you guys were talking. I started watching. I was like, I got to get on. But I was at a conference. I finished Sunday at noon, right? Yeah. And so normally, I've been really focused on AI. I do about, on Saturday morning, I have a ritual, I do about an hour to 2 hours of research on what are the developments of the week. Obviously, I didn't do that this week. I was at a conference. I took a quick peek on Tuesday. I am massively behind. It's been a week. I missed a week. Like there's all these developments out there that I'm like, oh my God,
Yes.
like I'm gonna have to work all weekend just to catch up. I don't like I can't leapfrog because the developments are so complex that I
That's
actually have
right.
to make
That's
up
right.
and then I mean and that's just one thing.
That's just
I
one.
mean, we
That's
have
right.
massive amounts of technological shifts that are just coming to bear. AI just the tip of many icebergs. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And
That's right.
it's a brilliant illustration of the world that are in and why we need to
Mm-hmm.
move, organizations need to move to a collaborative operating system
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
quickly as possible. Because if you think things are moving fast now, imagine an organization with people who are operating collaboratively with and skillfully with AI. How
Yeah.
fast will they be
Yeah.
innovating?
Built on trust, built on a culture of trust, so that you're not running into the groupthink
Yeah,
situation, or you're not running into the, for
which was
example,
the
what Jan
subject of
shared
this.
about multiple multiple groups. Listen, this was my therapy session. I needed it because we started out with having a scenario and experience with groupthink. We talked about the leadership capabilities, skills, things that managers should do, organizations can do. We talked about real world examples of how the technology shift and innovation shift impacts. And again, if you're intending to be in business next week, this is kind of important. This is, having an organization and a team that's collaborative. And the one thing I just want to leave with folks, if you're a leader watching this, is really think about your approach and the way that you're showing up and the perception. Because Linwood, I didn't even think about that component, that perception. If you're someone who is leading a large, complex project, or if you're just a project leader on a smaller project, there is a level of perception. And do people feel comfortable sharing feedback with you? Is it it's not a checkbox, let's say psychological safety, because it's the buzzword for 2023, 2022. It's, are you actively creating that environment where people can speak up and give you the right answer to solve a problem? So I think this has been amazing for me, y'all, to really lean into speaking up more based on that culture of trust and really solving that problem.
Well,
Yeah.
and just like leaders can't see everything, they need us to show. Yeah, I mean it's
Exactly.
got to be a collaborative thing.
It
Yeah,
is collaborative. Yeah.
and I think that's the value of purpose, right? When we can say this is
Yes,
where we're going. I am not
that's
speaking
right.
against you. It
That's
is you and
right.
me
It's
trying to
you,
get
me.
here. Yeah,
That's
and so
right.
that's how you need to hear this.
I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah.
I love that.
We need purpose and values when we're solving complex problems across organizations, because we need alignment. Remember,
Yes.
when we
Yeah.
are working on large complex problems with multiple companies, we're not able to just tell people what to do.
That's right.
We need to have shared purpose, shared values to create alignment. It's so important. Peter's work on purpose
Mhm.
is excellent. Really encourage you to check out what he's doing. Accelerate is building the infrastructure to help organizations to rapidly transform, adopting these management practices, because we have serious problems and real challenges that we have to deal with. Folks, our time is almost up.
Ah.
Have a
Well, we got to
That was
throw,
fast.
the work that Shelley's doing in this area is to make sure
Yeah,
that people are
absolutely.
known and can speak
No,
Architect
about
for
who they
values
are.
and culture.
personal brand. I forgive me for not mentioning personal branding,
Yep.
culture,
Everything.
values. Those are
Culture.
all things that Shelley is an expert in. They're critically important in a digital world. You need to have a representation of a digital representation of who you are, not what you do,
Yes.
who you are.
Exactly.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
So much
Thanks,
fun, as
everybody.
always.
Goodbye, Facebook. Goodbye, YouTube.